My experience with sickle cell disease has been a difficult one. Diagnosed at birth, most of my life really going through the motions, up and down, mostly downs. Living with sickle cell, it gets really hard. There's just pain that lingers all the time. Yeah, I was constantly in and out of the hospital from probably September to April. Just admissions, hospitalizations, ER visits, and there were periods in my life where I couldn't even get off the bed. I had given up, basically, and to me, I was just existing, and I was actually looking forward to, hoping it would end. My support system has been my wife. For so long, Amanda had told me, hey, listen, your goal in life is just to survive. At this time, Amanda wasn't pregnant, so I feel bad for saying this, but I really did not want to be here. As soon as we got the good news that my wife was pregnant, everything, it was literally like a switch. Like my mindset completely changed. I gave up on giving up. I had this excitement for life that I never had before. Then I started researching gene editing. At the time when I was infusing, I was just numb that after all these years, this is, potentially where it all comes to an end. And just enjoying looking at the room around me, almost like a new birthday, I'd say. Since having gene therapy, the difference is night and day. We've had Sebastian and things are going well. We're home and I'm just living life to the fullest, energized, and we wanted to have more kids, so we specifically went and tried for twins. I don't think I'd have been able to do that if I had sickle cell. There's no way I would have won that battle, so I felt extremely confident that this gene therapy is really giving me an opportunity to live out my dream of being a father. Let's go get more kids. My advice to anyone seeking gene therapy is don't be afraid. This could definitely give you the life you're looking for.
To the roof of Africa. What an inspiration.
First sickle cell patient to ever summit Kilimanjaro. It is history in the making. Jimi Olaghere standing on the summit of Kilimanjaro, 19,341 feet. Wow. This is the first time a sickle cell disease patient has summited the highest peak in Africa. Congratulations, Jimi. You are an inspiration to patients around the world.
So, good morning, everyone. Good morning. What a great way to wrap up our last day of the meeting on the Mesa in Phoenix, Arizona. My name is Tim Hunt. I'm the CEO at the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, and I really want to thank everybody for coming, making the trip out to hot Phoenix, but we've had a great conference, and people may remember on day one, if you were able to hear me speak, I mentioned that one of our mantras inside of the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, our patients are our true north. And so it's with that, I'm delighted to have this terrific panel. I think most of you know Luke Timmerman from the Timmerman Reports, celebrated journalist, author, prolific author, philanthropist and the inventor of the Termin Traverse, which has raised millions of dollars for really important causes, including cancer research and life science cares and other important organizations. So he is the reason that that Jimmy was able to climb Mount Kilimanjaro 4 years after being treated with CasGevy. Jimmy was able to summit the highest mountain in Africa at 19,000 feet. He was telling me about one of his training sessions, and he said, you know, we climbed a mountain that was like 4,000 feet, and his legs were knotting up. It was the first climb he did, and he's like, I felt awful. Got up the next day, and I felt great. Didn't take any Advil, my legs didn't hurt. I'm like, at 56, when I go to bed and my legs are killing, they hurt worse the next day. So it's an amazing story. So I'll get off the stage, and I'll let you guys take it from here.
Thanks, Tim, and to the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine for having us. It's a real honor to be here with you all this morning and with my dear friend, Jimi Olaghere. His story is inspiring. This is, I know many of you in this audience, what transformational effect happened for him in his life, this is what you get out of bed in the morning to do every day at your companies. It's really inspiring. So 3 weeks ago, we were together standing on that summit of Kilimanjaro with 20 colleagues, biotech executives and investors. We raised $1.2 million for Sickle Forward, which is an organization that advances newborn screening for sickle cell disease on the continent of Africa. It was a life-changing and forever bonding experience that we had together. And as Tim said, Jimmy was the first sickle cell patient to ever summit the highest peak in Africa. It was an amazing thing. It's a testament to the power of science. He was one of the first people to get the CRISPR-Cas9 treatment from Vertex and CRISPR in clinical trials. And then, of course, his personal determination and willingness to take on that challenge. And so let's dig into the story. Let's rewind a bit, Jimmy. Tell folks a little bit about your journey with sickle cell disease. You're born in the United States, but family from Africa, you spent part of your time growing up in Nigeria. Can you sort of compare what your experience was like with sickle cell in these two places?
Absolutely. Happy to be here, everyone. Growing up in Nigeria with sickle cell was difficult because we didn't have access to the healthcare we have here. I remember a particular example is growing up, finding myself eating things like chalk, dust, powder, and in Nigeria I hid this behavior because I thought I was losing my mind. And then I moved to the US. I get the opportunity to participate in the support group, and some young girl similar to my age, she comes up and she's exhibiting the same type of behavior, eating chalk, eating foam, and the hematologist said, yeah, that's something called pica. You know, that's what you experience when you don't have a lot of nutrients in your body, and it is your body's way of trying to find nutrients. And for like almost 5 years, I thought I was going mad, you know, and it wasn't until I moved here that I realized I was, in fact, a medical condition. Another thing also, just growing up with sickle cell in Nigeria, at the time, we didn't have access to pain medication, high-powered opioid pain medication. So I remember for years, my parents will try to alleviate my pain with like a menthol rub or a Panadol, and I would just be in pain for hours until I eventually passed out. And I eventually moved to the US, and in that same support group, they told me, listen, if you ever have a pain crisis, just call 911. You know, and when I experienced my first pain crisis in the US, I called 911. 10 minutes later, there was an ambulance in my basement stretchering me to the ER, and before I knew it, I had like an infusion of morphine and my pain was gone. So those differences were so vast.
Now, for those who don't know that much about sickle cell, can you describe the pain and what drives that?
The pain is sometimes indescribable. I've heard other warriors describe it as just a continuous breaking of your bone nonstop, or shards of glass just flowing through your vein. And that pain is caused from the sickled cells that are being clogged in different tissues or back. And because the oxygen is not able to move freely, it causes pain to those tissues, and that's actually what manifests in pain.
And the fatigue as well. You don't have the ability to carry oxygen like your red blood cells don't have that same capacity.
Correct. I couldn't go through a flight of stairs without stopping to catch my breath, and nothing extravagant, just 10, 20 stairs, and I'm done. I'm trying to catch my breath just because we don't have the same oxygen capacity as hemoglobin A does.
Mm-hmm. So you had this pain and fatigue, and it was constant, but it would flare up and down at times. Now, did you have newborn screening? Did you know what you had from an early age?
I knew, yeah. That's actually why I was born in the U.S. My mother didn't have access to newborn screening, or amniocentesis, as they called it back then, in Nigeria, and she was fortunate enough to be able to come here to the U.S. to get that amniocentesis test done and confirm that I would have sickle cell disease. So it is still, till this day, in remote parts of Africa, people don't have access to that simple test.
Okay, so you knew what you had, but the treatments were inadequate, didn't really know what to do about it. And you've had some pretty low moments, both as an adolescent and as a young adult. Can you talk a little bit about some of those rough points?
Yeah. I like to describe sickle cell as a succession of ticking time bombs. I remember one day waking up and I went blind. My vision was just completely blurry. And my wife, actually, I wasn't even married then. All my memories of sickle cell usually have, but this time I wasn't even married. I was taken to the emergency room, and they told me this was sickle cell related. I'm like, how does vision and sickle cell connect? And it turns out, when you're not getting good blood flow, oxygenated blood flow to the vessels in your eye, it can actually blur your vision. So we started with that. And then one day I went to a routine hematology visit, and they told me, yeah, we're gonna have to take out your gallbladder. I'm like, wow. So I had my gallbladder taken out. And another visit, it's, oh man, your spleen is pretty swollen. If it doesn't, deflate in the next couple of hours, we're gonna have to take that one out too. So aside from just the pain of sickle cell disease, all your organs are in complete jeopardy. I remember going to a hospital as well, and at the age of 19, they were encouraging me to have a hip replacement because of avascular necrosis. So it's just, you're in a prison that the walls are constantly just shrinking as you keep on losing organs. One particular crisis I remember was just to get a simple portacath placed. And my wife and I had talked to the surgeon that, listen, I have sickle cell disease. I know it's a simple portacath placement, but I do need a blood transfusion just because of my history with sickle cell disease. And he was like, oh no, I'm the surgeon here. Don't tell me how to operate my OR. It's just portacath surgery. I'm not gonna give you a blood transfusion just because of that. And so he ended up not giving me a blood transfusion. We had the portacath placed, and on the drive home, I had a heart attack in the car from not having that portacath placed in. So we literally had to park on the side of, this is in Jersey on 287, and have ambulance rush me back to the hospital where they confirmed that I had suffered cardiac arrest. So it's just, that's what sickle cell is like.
Did anyone ever give you a life expectancy, or what?
Many times. I think they took 20, it was my initial life expectancy. And this was a doctor, doctor was actually based, it was more of a family clinician. And it was after I'd had a really, really difficult time living here in the US as a young man. And my parents told me to come back home to Nigeria just to recuperate. And the doctor was like, listen, if you send your son back to the US, he's not gonna see 20. And then after that, it was, oh, dude, you're not gonna make it to 30, man. You have really severe sickle cell. Your hips are gone, your gallbladder is gone. There were so many things going on that they said I wasn't gonna see 30, and at some point I started believing it.
So Now, you're describing the physical aspects of the disease, but there's also a very important psychological component. How did, and doctors are telling you, don't do this, don't do that, and you're kind of afraid of doing various things. Can you talk a little bit about that mindset or the mentality, the toll that it takes?
Absolutely, and to their point, they're telling you this because sometimes you can't do it. There were many times I tried to do things that were beyond my reach, and I knew the consequence, like, man, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna suffer from it. For example, swimming. Swimming was something I loved, but every time I swam, I had a serious crisis right after. But I was tired of watching life pass me by. I'm like, listen, I am going to swim, have fun with my sisters, and I'm gonna go to the hospital right after. So that's what it is. The mental toll the disease takes is you are literally seeing life pass you by, and in some aspects, you're being robbed of life. There were many times I had to hibernate at home from September to April, where I won't leave the house just in fear of getting a serious crisis, or even at home having a crisis. I would just shelter at home in order not to be a burden or get a crisis. And that just takes a severe toll on your mental health when you're not able to be an actual participating, contributing member of society.
Yeah, there were long stretches, I know, where you told me you were bedridden, and that's depressing.
Yeah.
Now, did you ever consider a bone marrow transplant? Because we know those to be curative.
Yeah, I did, and I have three sisters. My sisters, we did the Be the Match test, and unfortunately for me, none of them were a direct match for me, which in hindsight turned out to be pretty positive.
Okay, so bone marrow transplant was not a good option. How did you hear about this CRISPR experimental therapy for sickle cell?
So after the failed bone marrow transplant experiment, my life was really hanging in the balance. It was complication after complication, and my parents were like, all right, we have to find another solution. And I started doing some research. I had seen some news that gene therapy is possible to help genetic diseases like sickle cell disease. Did research and really did it to kind of appease my parent, because at this point I was on my way out. I'm really done with life at this point. I'm like, there's nothing worth it for me here anymore. And I'm like, I'm just gonna do this, send the report to my parents, and hopefully one of these days this pain will end. And unbeknownst to me, there's this cell and gene therapy industry that's bubbling, and I get this article in my inbox about a woman named Victoria Gray being the first person to have her sickle cell alleviated from CRISPR-Cas9. And I reached out to the team that did that clinical trial, and they reached back out to me, and that's how I started.
You went to Nashville, is that right?
Nashville, correct.
And you're based in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit about that experience? Because that was pretty arduous.
It was, and it was in 2020, so we had the pandemic on top of it, which made it even more difficult. But I like to call myself the luckiest person with sickle cell disease. That turned out to work in my favor because I was in the South region already, the southern state, and participants that lived in coastal cities like New York, LA, they couldn't participate anymore because all the flights were grounded. And because I could drive to Nashville, that actually propelled me from patient number 16 to patient number 4. So I got to have the therapy sooner. It was difficult. It took about a year, but it was obviously worth it.
Mm-hmm. You spent something like 17 weeks in the hospital?
Yeah.
With various preconditioning regimens you had to go through before you could get your edited cells infused. When did your transplant occur?
My transplant occurred September 21st of 2020.
Yeah, and that's a big date in your life. What happened after that?
What happened after that was actually quite strange because, before I got the transplant, my wife was 8 months pregnant. So at this point, I had to kind of switch my mindset from not wanting to be here to I desperately want to be here, And I was in complete shock because I was desperate for the therapy. And after I received the infusion, I was expecting to, be happy, excited, and I was actually lost for a few months because of I feel like my identity had become so enmeshed with my disease that I didn't know what to do when I could feel the therapy taking its course and working.
You were a sickle cell warrior in your mind, and you didn't have to push back against that anymore. You were functionally cured. Yeah. How did you feel?
I think for a moment I felt confused because for so long I've lived with pain for most of my life, and I had used pain as this chip on my shoulder to get things done, to live, and all of a sudden I didn't have pain to push me anymore. So I was confused, and I got therapy, I got better, and now I'm experiencing something I like to call post-traumatic growth or adversarial growth. In other words, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And it's sad because there's too few of us that get to experience that luxury of having that paradoxical event of having something be a curse all of a sudden turn out to be a blessing.
So you started feeling a lot better. Your energy is up. Your pain has subsided. You've not had any pain crises since, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And suddenly a whole bunch of things become possible through this post-traumatic growth, like having a family, and traveling more for your work. And eventually you get a call from me to climb Kilimanjaro. Yeah. And I'll just tell people, I learned about Jimi from an article that he wrote in Technology Review as a patient. And as I was recruiting for that Timmerman Traverse for Sickle Forward, I thought it would be really great if we could find a patient who could join us. And little did I know how big of an undertaking that would be. But what was your reaction when you got that invite and you thought, Kilimanjaro, really?
Yeah, it was shocking. We were actually, my family and I, we were in Hilton Head having a vacation, and I got that email. It was February of this year, and I read it, and I'm like, what the heck? Kilimanjaro? I'm like, at this point, I'm obsessed with my health because I finally have control over it. So I'm physically active and always looking for challenges. So I'm like, wow, this is actually perfect timing. And my wife and I were researching what it looks like to hike Kilimanjaro. And even before we had looked up YouTube, I knew in the back of my mind, oh yeah, I'm doing this, And she was like, oh wait, we still have to talk about it yet? I'm like, yeah, we still have to talk about it. And I'm like, I have no clue if I can do this, but I'm trying it.
Now, previously, what was the highest elevation that you had been to, and how did you feel?
Pre-transplant rather, I'd made a couple of trips to Denver, and they turned out quite catastrophic for me. They actually had to emergency land the plane, because I didn't do well with the high altitude at all. So that was one of the reasons my wife was like, I don't think you could do this. And I think that was probably 6,000, the Denver airport, 7,000. So I had a pretty bad experience already at high altitude, but just having the daily evidence in my life with how great this therapy had worked for me, I had a feeling that was something I could easily overcome if I trained.
And you had been training, you had been doing rowing. I know that's one of your things. So you've been working on your cardiovascular fitness. But I mean, as we did more research on this and talked to physicians, we learned that sickle cell patients are advised to not go above 10,000 feet. A hypoxic environment makes the disease worse. So we really had to make a calculated risk and work through this gradually through the year. Could you talk a little bit about the things that you did to prepare yourself physically and mentally?
I spent the whole summer training. I think one of the first things your co-chair, Alan Anderson, told me was, hey, listen, Jimmy, we invited you to this trip, but I want you to think of it as going on a mission to spread awareness. Your goal isn't to summit. And when he told me that, oh my God, Alan, you don't know me. How can you invite me to Kilimanjaro and tell me I'm not supposed to summit, you know? And he took me on a couple of local hikes in North Carolina close to me. And I remember the first one we did, it was, I think, a 4,000-foot mountain. It wasn't high by any comparison to what we've achieved, but it was extremely difficult. I had never done, I think it was a 7-hour hike. And I remember coming back down from that mountain, and we had to take breaks every 15 minutes because my legs would just not move anymore. And eventually when I got in my car, I ended up getting a speeding ticket because I was speeding down the mountain because I had so much cramps. I wanted to find a place to get out of the car, and I didn't want to park on the side of the mountain. That's how bad it was. I got home, my legs felt like spaghetti. I couldn't move them. And I decided not to take anything. I went to bed, and I woke up the next day like nothing happened. And I was like, oh man, I might have a chance at actually doing this. So we did North Carolina, and then eventually we did Colorado, which was specifically for high altitude. And then you were right with me when I was able to summit that mountain. And just from someone that I would take trips to Nigeria or the UK to see my family pre-transplant, and it would take me 2 weeks to recover from a flight. And to be standing on a 14,000-foot mountain with you, it was such an emotional thing that I couldn't believe I had achieved that.
Yeah, I remember that was 1 month before Kilimanjaro, and I said to you at the time, I think you have a chance to summit Kilimanjaro at 19,000 feet. You did so well, and sure enough. So now that you've done it, what else? What's next? What else do you think you can do?
I don't know. I have some plans, but I want to really touch on that climb. And I don't know if you designed this purposely. I remember I think it was one of the third days, and we were getting higher and higher in elevation. And there was this, our teammate, Alan Romeo, this guy, so jovial, funny. The porters ended up calling him Mr. Happy because he just made everyone happy. And he had this policy of never leaving a man behind. And I was going at a slow pace in order not to induce anything crazy. And it was just me and him one day hiking at the back of the bus, as Eric would call it. And we would do this check-in often, he and I. Like, we'll stop for the sip break, they called it. And he checked in with me, Jimmy, how you doing? And like, I'm doing good. And then I say, Alan, how you doing? He was like, his exact words were like, Jimmy, what can I say? I'm suffering. And I was like, good. Now, for a microsecond or just those few days, you know what it's like to live with sickle cell. The high altitudes perfectly simulated being short of breath, constant headaches, pain, nausea. And I thought, that really centered that whole excursion for me because we had a bunch of biotech leaders, even if it's in a very micro way, knowing what it feels like to live with sickle cell disease.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that point up because it is the team effort. It is, everybody's experiencing the altitude in their own way, and it may vary from day to day, but that is part of what bonds the team so closely. And the support that everyone was there to provide each other, you included, is a big factor. And of course, the Tanzanian support crew is amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, but what you've just done, it would have been completely unfathomable prior. Like, sickle cell patients that's just a no-go zone. And now you can do it. And so this is, it symbolizes biotech at its best, and your determined spirit provides hope to 100,000 sickle cell patients out here in the United States and millions more around the world. What do you hope to do next to spread that message of hope?
I think, I don't think anyone is going to go try, particularly with sickle cell disease, to summit Kilimanjaro, not anytime soon.
Yeah, it's a symbol.
Yes, but I think they're going to see that they have the opportunity to overcome the Kilimanjaros in their life, be it going back to school, starting a family, But most importantly, before they get to that step, I think what I want to focus on doing is making sure that these therapies are easily accessible, not just here in the U.S., globally. You know, I think Vertex and CRISPR has done a fantastic job in creating and commercializing a technology like this, but they often say pioneers get slaughtered. And what they're doing, and settlers prosper, and I think they are now in that stage of settling down and making sure that this therapy is available to everyone else. And in my opinion, I think Africa needs to be in that equation. You know, for example, I was collected 4 times, and no one knows why I had to do 4 collections. I don't think there's enough genetic diversity. We don't have enough data to understand gene therapy and why things happen. And I think the answer to that is solving for these issues by including more people in clinical trials of African descent. So that's what's next for me, is making sure in some shape or form that, you know, clinical trials are accessible in Africa. You know, they say the best way to predict the future is to create it. So I want to urge everyone here in the audience to go out and create a future for sickle cell disease where gene therapy is accessible. You know, it is absolutely possible, you know, through in vivo or even just ex vivo on the continent. So that's what I want to spend my time doing.
It's a great mission. It is worth noting that since you enrolled in a clinical trial, you obtained access for free.
Correct.
But the product has now since been commercially approved, and it is priced at a point that is prohibitive for a lot of people, or it certainly limits the access to that wider population of sickle cell patients. Okay, we have just a couple minutes left. Does anyone have a question for Jimmy? I think we have a microphone out there. Everybody's just spellbound.
Well, I mean, that gives me an opportunity. Tim mentioned it on the onset of this chat. It's just this guy right here, $11 million for sickle cell, life science cares, cancer. Yeah. I had the opportunity for him being my tent mate in a tent yay big, you know, so we spend many moments together, and the work that he's doing is unreal. So that applause was deserved. I don't think we as the community and you guys as the biotech leaders get to, you know, thank you enough. You know, the work that you do is fantastic. So I wanted to, you know, make sure I say thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. It was a real, it was one of my great moments in the mountains. I've had a lot of great moments in the mountains, but to see you do that, and then, you know, I had to laugh seeing the video where you clapping up there on the summit with my mittens. Those are my mittens. Yeah. I loaned you my tent mate. And it's great to see Doug McConnell here. Doug, CEO of Safi Biotherapeutics, was with us on the mountain. Great to see you. I think there's a question here in the front. Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Can we bring a microphone up front here in the center? Or maybe just speak loudly.
So first of all, thank you so much for being here. I mean, Jimmy, your story is inspirational. So my question is, you talked a lot about how participating in the clinical trial has positively impacted your life. Can you talk a bit about how your community in Africa or Nigeria felt about you seeking the clinical trial?
Yeah. From my standpoint, seeking the clinical trial was, at that point, a moment of desperation. So I didn't seek approval from anyone. I just went head first. But post-transplant, I've heard a lot from people that live in Africa in particular. And I feel that same sense of desperation that I had. A lot of people are, first of all, spellbound that a therapy like this is available and it looks to be bona fide and working. And now their question is, how can I get it? You know, I get emails of people asking me to connect them with Dr. Frangul, who was my researcher, and I'm like, unfortunately, that's not how it works, you know. But the desperation is palpable, and I feel like I owe it to them to at least do something to where we can get to a stage where there are clinical trials of a similar magnitude happening on the continent.
Okay, I think we're out of time. Everyone, please join me in thanking Jimi for being with us.
Thank you.
Great.
I just want to share, we made as a nonprofit, we made a very small donation to the bigger cause of Sickle Forward, and these guys were awesome. They put together this great poster, which they brought to the summit, had it look like it's signed by everybody on the team, right?
Almost everybody.
Almost everybody. Did you forget to sign it? We got a pen out back.
Actually, I did not sign that. That's
you
true.
You did sign it, didn't you? You signed it, didn't you? We have a pen. Okay. You can sign it twice. Isn't that great? Yeah, really terrific. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Tim.
Really appreciate it. Yeah. Awesome, man. Thanks.